Author's Vlog Supplemental 14.5. Told you guys I'd be back. So this week we talked about exposition. So we gave you a lot of ideas of things you can do to help with exposition to get rid of any of those big info dumps. So I wanted to show you kind of what I did in mine, how I kind of got around dealing with the big info dump, because I do, like most urban fantasies, I have this world that I have to build, and none of them are exactly the same. If you read urban fantasy, you know this is true. They all tend to have similar things. A lot of them have werewolves and vampires and fae and just mythical creatures and gods and all this other stuff. And none of them are quite the same. Each iteration of it goes in a different direction. If you look at the Fever series by Karen Marie Moning and the fae that she has, and then you look at the Dresden Files fae that Jim Butcher created, and then you've got the fae that is in the Mercedes Thompson Patricia Briggs series, they're totally different creatures. In each iteration, they're fae, and they go back to that root, but they go in very different directions. And that totally happens in every urban fantasy. So I have the same thing. And because it's very different from anything else, I have to explain and show to my readers how they're different, what the rules are for mine, how they interact with the world, what their powers are. I have to explain all that to the reader as they read so they understand what's happening, so they understand the rules. Otherwise your reader is lost and has no idea what to do. So I'm going to go ahead and write some crap on the board and I'll be right back. First things first. We've got all the races that are typically in urban fantasy. What are we dealing with in mine? Really? I mean, this is a lot. We've got the fae, elves, dwarves, shifters of all kinds. This isn't even the whole list. Elementals, the Asgardians / gods, giants, vampires, humans, witches, wizards, demons, all the different things that could possibly be in urban fantasy. But what does book one deal with? First and foremost, cut this whole thing down. I don't need to tell my readers all of this, or how the whole world functions as far as outside of this. Like, remember ages ago I showed the diagram of how my worlds work and the fact that there's more than one world out there. That there are all these different parallel realities with elves and fae and dwarves and elementals, and they're all living on different worlds and da-da-da. My readers don't need to know about that in the first book. Not important. So we're taking that out right from the top. So the only world we're dealing with is Earth. So that's one world. Done. How about all of this crap? Well, we know the fae are involved because the fae courts... Alright, I should use a totally different color. So we know we're going to deal with the fae, because if you watch my last one or any of my other, you know that the fae are involved in this particular book, just in this book. So we'll talk about the fae. How about elves? Nope, they don't appear in this book. So I'm not going to really talk about them. Maybe in passing, they don't appear. Dwarves? Nope, they're not involved either, so I'm not telling them anything about that. Elementals? Nope. Asgardians? Possibly. There might be a mention. Giants? Nope, not talking about them. No. Vampires? I don't even know if they exist yet in my world. So far, I'm on the no column of that. That might change, I don't know. Humans? Well, yes, we know humans are there, but we don't really have to explain a lot about humans, because everybody already knows about humans. Witches and wizards? A little bit. So yeah, we're going to talk about that. Demons and other astral planey things that are whatever. Nope, don't need to know about that. No. Alright, how about shifters? We know we're going to deal with cat shifters, so those are involved. How about any of these others? Not really. They're mentioned in passing by Rafe, and I'll show you when that happens. So they're sort of mentioned, but again, just in passing. But it is about cat shifters, because the two are cat shifters. But they're not normal cat shifters, so that's explained a little bit. So these are the 4 things that are even going to be mentioned. So that cuts it down significantly. That goes into, I'll be talking a little bit about the magic. So there's a little bit of that because I'm talking about them. You also get a tiny bit on magic. So this is what I end up talking about, are these 4 basic categories. Well, 3 basic categories actually, because again, we all know about humans, so there isn't a lot you have to say about them. So I don't have to worry about that either. So I've got 3 main things that up to this point I need to talk about and explain to my readers in some way in the book. And this is everything that I've gone over thus far in the story. Literally in the story. Now, I could totally have dumped this all in the beginning with a prologue. But you know how we feel about prologues, so I didn't. So how did I do it? So far, the first thing I told people, or the first bit of information I wove into the narrative, was the main character Brea specifically telling the reader, we turn into we turn into cats. We're cat shifters. That was just in the narrative itself, because it's first person, so I can totally get away with that. Their clothing changes too. This is unusual. I know if you've read anything else with shifters in it, they all have to get naked. That's like one of the big things about being a shifter, is you always have to chuck off all your clothes. They don't. Well, that's interesting. So I put that in. She doesn't specifically, oh no, she does say it. So she also puts that in the narration. This is at the very, very beginning, like opening image, they're going to the party, that's where she talks about that. This doesn't come up until later when they're at home. So that's a little ways difference. Between these two, some of their senses are mentioned. She uses her sense of smell. She shifts her eyes to look in the dark. It's not specifically said, but she uses it. So you already know she's a cat, and then you get to see a little bit of how she uses the power, what they do with their powers. Then you find out that their clothes change with them, and what they wear becomes the color of their fur. So there's a whole thing about why they only have certain colors in their wardrobe, and it's because, I don't know if you've ever noticed, but there are no hot pink cats running around, so they don't wear hot pink clothes. So that's kind of fun too. They can be any cat. This is mentioned, gosh, early on when they become a specific kind of cat, and then they go into the woods, and then they shift to something bigger. So this is through action. This is through what they're doing. They must stay secret. This is done mostly with narration again, where she just mentions that they don't tell anybody, they have to stay secret, blah, 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 that they learn this from their father. Sexual stuff makes it hard to control. This is mentioned also by the narration at a point where she mentions they don't really date, and that's because it's hard to keep a secret when you're clawing your partner because you're so excited. So that was mentioned in narration, but again, not as an info dump, just kind of as in passing, like, we don't do this because of this. Witches exist. They find this out in, it's after the break into 2, B story. So this is the beginning of the fun and games. They find out that witches exist because their mother's a witch. This is, again, more of an action / dialogue, because Rafe mentions or asks, is your mother a witch? So this is a dialogue thing. Wow, this thing's drying out when I hold it open. Rafe is a rune mage. This is demonstrated. This is action. So after this happens, they go out, they look for their parents a little bit, like they sniff the trail. Like, watch my last one, you'll know where I am. Also in the fun and games, it's an action. You actually see him using his ability. Like lightning shoots out of his hands and hits some people. And that leads to them discussing things. So Rafe specifically flat out tells them other shifters exist. Dialogue. Because they ask. There are differences. Again, dialogue, because they ask about that. That gets into what some of the differences are. And again, that's dialogue between the characters. The Fae exists. Well, one visits. One literally comes to the door. This is kind of action-oriented. One comes to the door. And then he explicitly tells them a few of the rules to deal with the Fae, because if they're going to go to the Fae court and they know nothing about it, he's like, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, do this. And that gives you some of the rules of dealing with the Fae, and that's done again through dialogue. So that's what I'm doing. I'm going through, and every time I get to it, I wait until it's situational. So when I get to a situation in which my main characters, who know very little, need to know something, that's when they learn it. Sometimes they learn it because they're interacting with it. There's a spot here, right in here, where they learn that other races exist. Other races. They learn that there's other magical weird-ass races out there that they knew nothing about, or hybrids and stuff like that, because literally some of them attack them. So that's how they learn that. It happens. It's an action. So you get to see them, and then there's dialogue saying what they are. That's what I've been doing. When Shvam and I talked about exposition, we said, you can do it through dialogue, you can weave it in the narrative. This is what we mean by weave it into the narrative. Literally weave it into the narrative. It's part of the story. You get little bits of information as it becomes pertinent to the story. That's what I've been doing. So I hope that was helpful. If you have any other questions or anything like that, you know how to get a hold of me. If you want to email both of us, hey@getwriting.wang. If you just want to email me, Stila Webb at getwriting.wang. That'll be down below. Give me a comment. As I said earlier, I'm participating in Camp NaNoWriMo. So if you're interested in participating in Camp NaNoWriMo and being in my cabin with other watchers of this ridiculous channel, you too can do that. That is at campnanorimo.net. Gods, I hope it's .net, or is it .org? Google Camp NaNoWriMo, it'll pop right up. Make sure that you don't want to be part of other people's cabins or automatically assigned. That's in the cabin fact of what is a cabin. And then my username is Stila. Just private message me and I can add you to our cabin. And we'd love to see you. It'll be a fun month of writing. You can write with us, put up your word count, and we can all cheer each other on and fetch about writing and be excited about writing and stuff like that, and you can talk to me directly. So that's what's happening. I will see you guys next week, and I will talk to you guys later. Get writing.